June Ray's wedding anniversary.
Hello.
June Ray.
Adrian Bow speaking. Hello. Hey, Tash. Hello, hello. Hey, Tash.
Morning.
How are you? Nice to see you. You can talk if you want. No worries. No worries. We'll wait for everyone else to jump on. There's Batesy, the king of TikTok. Loves it. Loves it. Right? Can dance, Greg. Can dance.
Yes, mate. Can cut a rug. Yep.
Yeah. Can dance. There's Brendo. He loves dancing too. Eh?
No, mate. I'm born with 2 left feet, so I can't. Yeah.
Oh, really? Yeah, I was born with 3. Is Dave joining us, Batesy, or just you and me today?
Just you and me, mate.
Yes. We don't need him. We don't need him.
Nah, we're good.
Nah, mate. What about the best session? Was the mate when he all those objections he was throwing at me. That was gold. Zero preparation.
Welcome to our world, mate.
That's good, mate. It's good. I love it. I love it. I love it. It's the best. The best. That's what that's a metaphor for life, mate. You got to make quick decisions on the go. You know. All good. Hey,
Like Anthony Albanese.
That's it. He loves it. Yeah, exactly. Hey, so what do you want to talk through today, Batesy?
We've got some questions to throw at you, mate, and we'd love to hear what your response is to these questions, just in what's going on in the current marketplace at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
go for it, mate.
Okay, so
go for it.
Just talking to some of the guys, I suppose what we'd love to talk about is some of the dialogue we need to use about managing vendors' expectations with the changing market.
Yep, no worries. So with that, Batesy, are we talking about sort of at once you're listed, after you're listed, or during the campaign, or all of the above, basically?
Well, I suppose all the above. I think initially when we're going to speak to them about going to market, you don't want to burst their bubble, but you want to remain upbeat, but you don't want them to be unrealistic either. Yeah,
I agree. So I'll give you a typical example, which, you know, that's why I still love being in real estate, because I'm sort of involved in this every day, like you guys, you know. So a typical example was last week I signed a property up, and my main focus was really just to talk about what their dream price was, what it's potentially worth, and what we're aiming for, you know. So the number 3 million was written on the agency agreement. We got the photos taken, you know, we got the contract in, and we're just about to go live today. So what I've done is set up a sort of what I call an expectation or a set to sell phone call. Doesn't have to be a meeting, but you know, if you want to, you can. A meeting's better if there's been 2 or 3 weeks that have gone past until you've listed it. But if it's just a few days, basically I've set that up to really talk about the auction strategy and about, you know, pricing, because I didn't even dwell on that at the listing at all. So I agree with you, Batesy, that we don't want to burst their bubble and start the management process before you list it. But I also find what you want to avoid during the listing is even talking about how you price the property and where you guide it as well. I actually don't see any upside in that whatsoever, you know, unless unless an owner actually directly asks me, which is seldom, but they do, and say, okay, so what will you be quoting to buyers, or what's the price? To say, you know what, we're not going live for another week or 10 days. I want to wait right till the last minute to provide that recommendation to you, because there's a lot that can happen between now and then in terms of competing listings and other sales that could take place. But nothing's changed. You know, 3 million still the goal. Okay, great. So I'll never commit to a number if they ask, but most times they don't even ask. So to you know, after this session, I'll be speaking to her, and then talking about what most agents talk about in listing appointments, which is, okay, given that we're going to auction, as you know, buyers are conditioned to add on, 10% or thereabouts to whatever you tell them, etc. So, and I know that you were looking at a property this week, which she was, and I think they were quoting, 3.5 million, and it sold for 4 million or something. So that's the perfect example. So I'm going to be making a recommendation somewhere in the high twos to put a price guide on it. In fact, I just got an email come through there because I briefed Harrison while I was on this call that if she calls back to have the conversation, and so we just got a price guide of 2.7 approved. Okay, so that's the first step. That's the first step. Is I don't see any upside in not only, being a dream thief or bursting their bubble, but also talking about pricing or quoting strategy at the listing appointment. Very easily done. And as you can see, even my associate was capable of making that conversation. It was a no-brainer, because he's heard me say it a million times. But unfortunately, I think a lot of agents get in the trap of having that conversation at the listing. And if you have it at the listing and say, look, 3's still the goal, but we need to quote 2.7. If you don't sign it up on the spot, the only number that's going to stick in their mind is what? 2.7. Yeah. So that's a real life example of between list to launch, right? So that's the first thing, which I think and of course, this is not meant to be misleading or non-compliant. We are fully compliant. We put 3 new comparable sales in the file. And we put in writing that's the new estimated selling price. No problem at all. That's easy. And especially in this market, the OFT are going to have a lot of problem trying to catch you for changing price guides up or down, because it's such a manic market. So that's that. Now, in terms of the moving forward with the campaign, what I really like to do, Batesy, is provide what I call mini expectation metrics, okay? So, for example, let's just continue with this same example. So 3 was on the agency. We just got a price guide approved at 2.7. It's probably worth 3 anyway, but in Sydney in particular, you've got to do that sort of 10% rule, But what I'll be telling the vendor before Saturday's inspection will be about some mini expectation metrics. So I'll be saying to her, look, we're going to have a meeting straight after Easter because this first inspection is this Saturday. I just want to let you know that unless I get 15 groups through, and unless I issue 3 contracts, and unless I've got about 3,000 internet views by the time we meet on Tuesday, I'm going to be disappointed. And that is below my expectations. And we're going to have a sit down and review the campaign to ensure we get it back on track. So I just want to let you know that. So straight away, there's an mini expectation metric, and I've made it specific. Now, the numbers for you guys will sound different, but they don't have to be perfect. Like you can sort of make them up, but when I say make them up, they've got to meet a certain criteria. So 15 is a good number for me. A few thousand web hits is a good number for me. 2 or 3 contracts is a good number for me. But you guys might decide to change those depending on what you think is what consistent with what your expectation. That way, you don't just turn up on Tuesday when you have a conversation with them and just say we're off track. I need to give you some recommendation. They already know that. Not to mention, how many times, Batesy, have you called an owner and said, great inspection today. We had 20 groups through, and they say, well, is that good or bad? Like you know what I mean? Or you're really excited. You say you've got, 18 groups through and one contract, and they're like, oh, only one contract. You know what I mean? So it's actually not their fault. Like they've either never sold or sold 20 years ago. So creating the mini expectation metrics are gold, because they will be a conduit to the following conversation. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. And mate,
so that's
would you do that at your set to sell meeting?
Ideally, yeah. I mean, obviously, because Harrison may have already briefed her on that with that set to sell when she called while I was on this call. But if not, I'll check with him. And if not, we'll remind her of those mini expectation metrics. So, yeah, ideally, just do it all at the set to sell, because, you want to separate all of this to the listing presentation, unless someone is really drilling you around at the listing around this type of data. They're like, well, what should we expect? What are you going to quote? Like, some people may drill you at the inspection, but it's unlikely. The other thing is you can actually do it. You can actually do it if you've signed it up on the spot. That's fine as well, Batesy, because you've got nothing to lose. Like, you actually signed it up on the spot, and it could launch within a few days. Do you know what I mean? So maybe you don't have time to do the set. So it could be the minute the ink dries on the agency agreement, or it could be within, sometimes you might list a property that doesn't launch for 3 weeks or 4 weeks. So you definitely want to wait, until just before launch, ideally 24, 48 hours beforehand,
Yeah.
So that's the mini expectation metrics. And then in this current market, if you're not doing a FaceTime, Zoom, or face-to-face meeting once a week, forget it. You're not gonna get them where they need to be. A phone call, a couple of times a week is not going to cut it. An email vendor report in isolation is not going to cut it. An agent called me yesterday who I coach and said, I send an email report to one of my vendors, and they called me back very upset. And I'm like, yeah, well, why? And they said, because I wrote a few, comments on there about what the buyers didn't like about it. And also I gave her the price feedback. I said, that's fine, but had you spoken to the owner about both those things over the phone before you actually put it in writing? Because it's very confronting when the first time they hear the price feedback or the negative comments, that they see it in writing. So I said to him, mate, that might have worked last year, buddy, but you can't hide behind technology and emails. Like, that's not going to work this year. In fact, I said to him, I would move away from the vendor report which talks about price or negative comments. Like, I don't do it. And he's like, oh, that would be very unusual. I said, okay, well, let's just start at least by, calling him and say, hey, Greg, I'm just about to provide you a detailed update on where we're up to, but I just want to run it past you first out of courtesy to let you know. Do you know what I mean? That would make more sense, Yeah. But my preference, frankly, is to remove negative comments and from the vendor report, and to remove price. And that way I'm calling them and I'm saying, look, I'm definitely going to send you a report on the metrics on real estate and domain. I'm going to let you know, who the buyers were that were interested. However, I just want to also, it's my obligation to advise you, why some buyers have chosen not to pursue the property. That sounds a lot better than, that generic template, which is positive comments, XYZ, negative comments, XYZ. It's pretty old school, Yeah. So, and then you can even justify it, Batesy, by saying, look, this buyer, they weren't particularly interested in something on a main road, but to be honest, that they've got a higher budget. So, at the end of the day, to the person that did show interest in the property, the main road was a huge bonus for them, because they don't have a higher budget. This is you know what I mean? So you got to be careful. You got to sort of hug them and then give them an uppercut, hug them and give an uppercut. You you can't just give uppercuts all day long, you know, because it's just not going to work, you know.
Yeah.
So I think that's important. So that weekly sort of, you know, whether it's face-to-face, FaceTime or Zoom, just for 20 minutes a week, even if you've got nothing to report, even if the campaign's going really well, because what we've learned, Fates, is and team, is when that magic day comes, whether it's within a week or whether it's at auction or whether it's after 3 months, and you deliver the offer that you know hand on heart is a great offer for the property. If you've displayed a really high evidence of activity, effort, energy, you know, calls, emails, showing up face-to-face, talking to, like we've heard it a lot of times, and you've been doing it for a long time, Greg, where they've said, look, it's not exactly what I want, Greg, but you know what? You've worked your butt off. I've got to just, if that's what it's worth, mate, you've left no stone unturned, mate. So that only works though if you're showing a high degree of effort and evidence, you know, because you know if the ad doesn't go in on time, or you don't call them after the open for inspection, or you don't provide the right feedback, or you know they don't hear from you for a week, you haven't earned that right, unfortunately, you know. So we've just got to be careful that not to be what we call blue sky merchants, where we only report to owners when the news is good, right? We need to report indiscriminately of what the news is, the same as a doctor, lawyer, and accountant would, you know. So a doctor provides a diagnosis, and whether it's good or bad, their tonality stays the same, but what they do is provide a solution and say diagnosis, but I'm going to write you a script, or I want you to stay off this food or whatever. The accountant, you know, whether you're going to get a 30,000 tax return or whether you've got a 150,000 tax bill you've got to pay off over 2 years, they're going to say this is the situation, but this is the solution, you know. So you can't just say, okay, well, buyer didn't like it because, you know, or we had only 4 groups through. Like you got to say that's fine. There's a solution to it, and when we catch up next week, it's below my expectations, as we talked about the other day. However, I've got plenty of recommendations to make to you in order to ensure that the following week we get more groups through, you know. And we all know the obvious one is price, but it doesn't always have to be. It could be marketing, it could be presentation, but you know, at least they're prepared for it. Okay. So I think if you stick to that formula about separating your listing appointment from your set to sell, separating pricing, quoting strategy from the listing appointment, creating mini expectation metrics, and in addition to whatever you normally do in terms of vendor communication, email, SMS, phone, just make sure that you're seeing their face at least once a week as well, just to see the connection in their eyes, and they can read your body language that you're still really enthusiastic about it, and that you may have to make recommendations in order to get more groups through the following week, you know?
Yeah, that makes sense. Another one was buyer's dialogue. So we're, you know, at this point in time, what we're finding, some of the guys and myself, is that they're saying to us, we'll wait as there's uncertainty with interest rates and everything else that's going on.
Yeah, perfect.
How do you deal with that, mate?
Okay, so first thing I'll be saying is if you've made that decision, then I support that, and I'm not going anywhere. Number one. Number two is, do you mind if I ask how long you've been looking for? Okay. And I don't know, I'd say the average buyer in your market might look for, you know, maybe 2 months, maybe longer, you know. In that 2 months, Greg, how many properties have you actually inspected? They might say, well, good question, maybe, I don't know, 30 or 40. Okay, good. Regardless of price, how many were you and your partner and your whole family actually interested in pursuing that suited you? 2. Okay. So what you're telling me is you want to pick the market within an inch of its life, if and when it does drop, and you want to find your perfect home as well. The alternative is you might be renting. Rents are going up. The alternative is you might be upsizing from a smaller property into a bigger property. The gap's only going to get bigger. So you really need a lot of stars to align, to make this happen, So I can only tell you, and I would speak very authentically, I can only tell you what I'd advise my own parents, and I'd be advising my own family and friends that if they see a property that's of interest to them, and if at the current interest rates they can afford the repayments, and if you're adopting at least a 5-year plan to buy this house, I wouldn't be overthinking it, because there's plenty of people that have tried to overthink the market, both sellers and buyers. And from buyers, prices have got away from them, and for sellers, it's like catching a falling knife. You know what I mean? So I just think that not only are you trying to identify a market that could be potentially lower in price, but you've also got to find the property that suits you as well. Like, it's not as easy as you think. So I think you sort of you don't challenge it too violently. Like, you support them if that's their decision, but also you just have a practical and pragmatic discussion about it, and remind them how long they've been looking, how many properties have they inspected, and how many did they actually like, that were in their price range, and also just tell them that fixed. Well, if you wait, you're there, because there's two sides to the story, Greg. Sure, they could wait for variable rates to go down, but fixed rates are already going up. So you could actually lock in on a fixed rate today, lower than what it's probably going to be in 6 months' time. So there's two sides to the story,
And would that be the same conversation, Bowie, to an owner occupier as to an investor?
Yes, it absolutely would. Absolutely. Well, if they're focused on interest, if that's what they're focused on, interest rates, but they're not really focused on interest rates dropping. They're really focused on interest rates being a means to an end for the market to drop. That's really what they're probably trying. Yeah. So I think it's the same, and, for an investor in particular, I don't know if you're finding it, but in Sydney, rents have improved, since COVID. So if I was an investor, I'd be recommending they should be taking advantage of that. And the yields are a lot better off than what they were. And the same thing, lock in on a really good, long-term interest rate, that will be higher. And, you can also tell them that, look, no matter how long you've been in the industry, whether it's 30 years, 20 years, 10 years, there's always little, what we call stagflation, which is, slightly higher inflation, slightly slower economic growth. But, we've never seen a period in modern history where prices have come off, 30%. You know what I mean? Like, it's never happened. Like, there might be slow growth, there might be a single-digit correction. Whether it's any black swan event that's occurred, whether it's the recession we had to have, whether it was the GFC, whether it was, the credit crunch or whatever, sure, maybe 10, 15%, but it's never been that dramatic, mate, and remind them, say, look, the last time everyone thought the market was going to crash, 2 years ago, it went up 25%. So I don't know about you, but I wouldn't take that gamble. Like, I'd be putting my money in a safe investment, whether it's to live in or as an investment, which is bricks and mortar.
Yeah. And mate, another one was obviously in this changing market, we're obviously going to have the tough conversations with our owners in regards to price adjustments. Which we haven't had to do over recent times as much.
Yep, absolutely.
What's that dialogue look like when you're talking to the vendor after a couple of weeks of being on the market and very little activity?
Yeah. So it starts with the mini expectation metrics, okay, that we talked about, because what you're doing is you're creating a foundation for that by saying, well, these are the metrics where I think if we don't meet, then when we catch up next week or have a chat next week, I'll be making recommendations because that's below my expectations. So So you're using the metrics you're using is number of web views, number of people through, a number of email inquiries that you've received, number of phone inquiries, and contracts issued, and second inspections. You can use all of those, right? So then when you do talk the following week, it's like, okay, good news, we hit all our metrics, so we don't need to do anything at this stage, which is great. Or another occasion might be, look, unfortunately, we didn't hit our metrics, so I talked about making some recommendations. I'm here to let you know that numbers don't lie, in saying that, you know, we've had thousands of web views, dozens of email inquiry, and dozens of phone inquiries. However, we had 4 groups through on Saturday with no offers. To me personally, Greg, that is too high of a dismissal rate. What I mean by a dismissal rate, Greg, is that buyers are seeing it, engaging with it because numbers don't lie, but they're dismissing it not on the photos because they're immaculate, not on the presentation because that's immaculate, but the tough conversation. I understand it is a tough conversation to have, but I'll be honest with you, they're dismissing it on price. So my recommendation is let's put the sale price aside for a minute. Let's put the auction aside for a minute. Let's just focus on what can we do today to get more than 4 groups through on Saturday. What can we do? So number one, I'd be removing that rug under the dining table because, in my opinion, some people didn't get a good sense of space. And I think if we do that, the floorboards will really show up nicely. Do you know what I mean? The second thing we can do, Greg, is when we first spoke, I know that you offered resistance on a professional video or a social media boost. I think we need to do that. You know, it's only going to cost a few $100s. You know, I think we need to. Thirdly, I know we're quoting a price guide of $950. Reality is no one's engaged with that, and the dismissal rate's been too high. I did have one buyer, Greg, who, even though it's not an offer, but made an indication of 900. My strong recommendation is we don't indulge in that offer. However, my strong recommendation is that we adjust the price guide to that and advise buyers that we've had feedback at that level, which the owner resisted on, and we're looking for something north of that, you know? So that way, it's not all about the price. You're sort of coming up with as many solutions as possible. Now the reality is, Batesy, that you might say all of that and they say, no, not prepared to do it. So guess what you do? You go back the following week, you let them do it. And the following week, as we all know, if nothing changes, nothing changes. So you're probably going to have, same, 3 groups through. So, and at that point, you've got even more compelling evidence because you've got even more web views, more inquiries, more of everything apart from more groups or any interest. So you just got to keep making that recommendation. And that's why the face-to-face, whether it's Zoom, FaceTime or in person, you know, it's very hard to get a price reduction over the phone. I'll be honest with you,
yeah.
Very hard. Yeah.
And mate, I suppose personally, what I have been doing in this marketplace of recent time is going to market. If we're not going by way of auction, but going private treaty, is just putting contact agent on there to gather more inquiry and then work up from there. What's your recommendation in regards to a private treaty scenario? Would you be putting a price guide on it straight away in this market?
Look, I've got a couple of trains of thought around this, Greg. Number one is, if it is straight out private treaty and not auction, right? I think we need to embrace what the advantage for a buyer is for private treaty. And the advantage for a buyer is, in most instances, there's a buy now price, right? They could go online and it's like for sale, $985. It's like, okay, well, if I pay that or something close to it, I'm probably a decent chance, you know? So it takes the guesswork out of it altogether. Where if it's auction or if it's private treaty with a guide or no price, then it almost mitigates the main benefit of private treaty, which is a buy now price. But if your owner is overpriced and doesn't agree to a sensible, asking price that you can publish, then I feel that your strategy is a good one, because at least you get the phone ringing, where if it's priced too high, the phone just won't ring, so you don't have the luxury of conversation. So that's why I said I've got two trains of thought. I think if it's a realistic price guide, or an asking price, and it's private treaty, if you interviewed 10 buyers, right, and asked them, hey, if a property's for sale and not auction, would you prefer to see an asking price or no asking price? How many out of 10 would say they'd prefer to see an asking price?
Probably 9 out of 10.
Correct. So I suppose we've got to, consider that as well. But so I suppose my answer to you, if it's a realistic asking price, embrace the one of very few benefits of private treaty and put it there. But if not, don't, and then get the phone ringing, and that way you can get a bit more creative in what you tell buyers, Yeah.
No worries. Are you one for just, if it was private treaty, just putting an asking price? Like, I'm a bit hesitant to just put an asking price, because you're putting a cap or a ceiling. Yeah, it'd be better to range it, wouldn't it?
To range it, yeah. Either way is fine. Like, it really depends. Yeah. So, but it could be argued though that if you put a range, that could put a ceiling on it as well. So I think both. Subjectively, if you've got an asking price of $985, sure, it's going to be hard to get more than $985. I get that. But if you get a range of $940 to $985, yeah, maybe it is more possible to achieve $1 million for private treaty. But yeah, so I think it's different for all markets. Like I don't want to change what's work. If it's working for you guys, like, just leave it. I do both, to be honest. So it just depends on the client, and, if someone's a bit high, then you sort of do a range to sort of try and, create a bit more it just depends. But some properties, I must admit, are very, very reasonably priced, and a single price I've found with that, buyers do like, and we sometimes sell it at the asking price as well. So it just depends. Depends.
Good stuff, mate. Well, I think we're up.
Yeah, perfect. No worries. Any other questions from anyone else, maybe? No. I can put it in the chat group, or just go on mute if you want. There's a chat group there. If not, we're all good.
Hi, Adrian.
Yeah. Yes, buddy. How are you?
Mate, just going into that price guide with regards to auction.
Yeah.
Still getting, especially in that sort of non-flood affected higher properties of the over $1 million mark here on the coast, we're getting a lot of people sort of still gun shy on auctions.
Yeah, sure.
You'll give them a price range, for example, between 1.1 to 1.2. And they're sort of the idea that because we've sold property in the last couple of months that have gone up to the sort of 1.3 mark, they're thinking it's sort of completely out of their ballpark. Just some dialogue on really trying to keep their hope alive, trying to get them to keep them there, get them registered as a bidder, etc.
Yeah, no problem. So you're talking about the buyers, because I suppose for an auction property, they're a bit hungover from the boom period where 1.112 meant 1.3 to 1.4. That's what you're saying, right?
Yeah, mate.
Yeah. So it all comes back to your conversation with the vendor in that case, So let's say your vendor is a seller at 1.2. Well, that means your price guide's going to have to be less than 1.1 to 1.2, and you'll have to just explain to your vendor that buyers are still, a bit hungover and bruised, if you like, from the pricing that was occurring last year, where an agent would tell them one thing and it would sell for 20% over. So there's nothing we can do about it to change their mentality, apart from providing a more realistic price guide, and don't think that that's underselling the property. It's just to engage the buyers. And then once the buyers inspect the property, we can have a bit more intimate discussion with them on price and encourage them to be more around that 1.2 to 1.3. But it could mean that we need to guide it at 950 to 1,050,000 or something like that. So it really comes back to your conversation with the vendor and just being really, really honest with them about buyer psychology at the moment, because that's what it is. It is buyer psychology, yeah. So because you're not going to change that buyer psychology overnight, until the market completely recalibrates and there's plenty of references there for properties that you were guiding 1.1 and it sells for 1.180, but at the moment they're still thinking that the same thing's going to happen as last year. So yeah, it's all about getting the price right.
Thank you very much.
No worries.
Any other questions?
All good.
I've got one quick, Bowie. That's all right.
Yeah, go for it, mate.
Sorry, mate. Just what are you using with the your database at the moment when you're just doing those routine calls? What sort of dialogue are you using for them if they're thinking of coming on to sort of progress them at the minute?
So it depends which category they fall in. So, if last time we spoke to them, they just said, look, I'm definitely not selling. Well, then we just, it might just be a 3 to 6 month connect, If, in the last few months, we spoke to them and they suggested there's some degree of appetite to do something, then firstly, we just asked them, what time frame are you comfortable with? And some just say, look, I 100% want to go after Easter, after the election, after school holidays. Fine. I mean, it's impossible to argue with that, but there's no reason why we can't, make a decision on which agent you want to appoint, get the agreement signed, and also get some photos taken so we can hit the ground running as soon as all that's over, Others might say, well, look, we're thinking about doing it in spring because we think the market's going to be a bit better then, Well, at that point, you could definitely, without, arguing too much with them, what you could say is, well, we know in spring that interest rates will be higher, and at the moment they're just talking about making them higher. So that's one thing. Two is there's a reasonable amount of stock on the market at the moment, but come springtime, there's also going to be your traditional spring stock in addition to the amount of stock we've got at the moment. And frankly, if you're looking to potentially buy after you sell, I would rather you be a buyer in spring than a seller, because with all the variables that are affecting the market at the moment, I've never seen so many in terms of interest rates, problems in Europe, inflation, change of government, etc. It's quite possible that we could be looking at a 5% correction. So I think I'd be making a decision as soon as practical, rather than waiting and hoping the market's going to improve, because I think we're at the end of this cycle, and the next cycle could be some years, until we hit another peak, Yeah,
that's good. Thanks.
Yeah, no worries. Anyone
Excellent,
else?
mate.
Yeah, no worries.
Thanks, Bowie.
Thanks, Bowie.
Thanks, pleasure, mate. Guys. You have a great day and a great Easter to you and your families, and stay safe and healthy.
Thanks, mate.
Thanks, mate.
See you guys. Bye-bye.